week 4 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few defenses I have as sleepers this week. The first one's the Dallas Cowboys. So the Cowboys, they do give up a lot of yards. They do give up a lot of points. But so far this season, things have changed a little here for this Dallas team. They're turning the teams over. They're getting short fields. And even last week versus the Philadelphia Eagles, they had a pick 6 in that ball game. So the first 3 weeks for them, week 1 at Tampa Bay, they did give up 31 points, but 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles. Week 2 at the Chargers, 17 points only allowed, 2 sacks, 2 win throws. And week 3 versus Philly, 15 points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 win throws, including the pick 6 I mentioned. So right here, week 4, they versus a pretty solid Carolina offensive unit. But this will be the toughest test to date for the Panthers, in my opinion, here. And I think they can get to Sam Darnold a few times with a couple sacks and maybe 1 or 2 turnovers. So right here, if you're in a pinch of defense, Dallas is still out there in 83% of fantasy leagues. And they're worth a sleeper shot this week. The next defense is the Detroit Lions. So the Lions had a decent show out in week 3 versus a Baltimore offense that is pretty explosive. So right here, the first 3 weeks of the season for the Lions. Week 1 versus San Francisco was a total joke. A sack, 2 fumble recoveries, 35 points allowed. Week 2 versus the Packers, 35 points allowed, again 3 sacks. And week 3 versus Baltimore, though, 4 sacks and interception and only 19 points allowed. So week 4 at the Chicago Bears, it's not that bad of a matchup, especially what we saw last week. Justin Fields be a crash test dummy behind there and taking tons of sacks and holding on to the football too long. And right here, the Chicago Bears give up the 3rd most fantasy points to defenses. So the Lions, I think they could get anywhere from 6 to 10 fantasy points in this one. And they're available in 98% of fantasy leagues. And the 3rd and final defense I have as a sleeper this week's the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings so far this season, they haven't been horrible in fantasy football for defense. Week 1 at Cincinnati, 27 points allowed, 5 sacks. Week 2 at Arizona, 34 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 win throws, including a pick 6. And week 3 versus Seattle, 17 points allowed and 2 sacks. So week 4 here, they verse, I think, a tough tested offense here. The Cleveland Browns this season, they don't look as explosive. Jarvis Landry's banged up. I know Odell Beckham Jr. just came back in the lineup for them, but they're still not scoring many points, in my opinion, Cleveland. They're scoring about early 20s to mid-20s this season. But I think this Viking defense could get to Baker Mayfield a few times and cause Mayfield to have a few turnovers. In my opinion, the Browns, they just don't run the ball enough with Nick Chubb in this offense. They get too throw-happy. And I think in this game, Mayfield will make a few mistakes and Minnesota's defense will be a decent play. And they're available as well in 84% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few defenses I have as sleepers for week 4 of the fantasy football season.